Alright, so at this point, I'm going to demonstrate how to sort of do finishing work on this. So one of the things I tend to use especially is sort of my paring knife, and always kind of make sure that your tool is clean, because otherwise it might not leave a sort of clean cut. And I will just kind of go over the surface, cutting away as needed. If you aren't necessarily comfortable with that, or if you don't have a paring knife, you do have one of these sort of carving tools in your toolkit. It has two ends, and depending on the shape you're using, you would want to use either the straight end or the curved end, and you can actually just sort of slowly chip away at the surface, carving it away. You can also do this to sort of take care of the edge of this and round it off. That is an option, so I'll do that. I'm not going to do that on the other side because I'm going to show you what just using the sponge does. So this is the point where I really want to be doing finishing, because you can kind of see how this is flaking apart. So it's getting a little bit dry to be doing this, so it's not, I'm going to want to get this done, and then I'm going to want to leave it alone. I have a little crack right there, so I'm going to add just a little bit of water, and I'm going to kind of dig my nail in to sort of fill that in. I'm going to want to make sure at this stage that I take care of any of those sorts of things, because if I don't do it now, they're permanently in the piece. There is no getting rid of them. And instead of using my fingers, I could use my sponge. But what you'll notice with the sponge is you may sort of get a bunch of these sort of sandy bits. The particular clay I'm using has a lot of what we call grog in it. So it's sort of a gritty material that gives the clay some sort of build strength. But notice as I go over this how that kind of rounds out nicely. If I rotate this, and you can kind of see this side how it's still kind of got a ridge there. Well, I could try to actually just use my sponge over that edge, but notice how it doesn't necessarily take away that excess. So that's something that I should really go in with a carving tool to remove and clean up, and then I can round out the edge if I like, or I can make it sharp. It's kind of up to you, and then I can go back over that, and it's a lot cleaner. And if you take your time, you can make it super clean. All right, so back to this. All right. So those are kind of a lot of the basics. So first things first is, remember, trim away as much as you can with either a paring knife, and don't aim towards yourself with a paring knife like I just did. Because you don't want to cut yourself. My paring knife is actually quite dull, so that's why I'm a little more free with it. But nonetheless, you should not be doing that. With your fettling knife, if you get one of the ones specifically for ceramic, those aren't really sharp and won't actually cut you. So you're just going to kind of shape it. So say I wanted to do an arch on this, I could go through and make this a wavy edge. It's not going to be something I can do quickly, and I actually might have to do some relief cuts in this. If you've taken wood chop, you know about relief cuts, because it just helps remove material as we go, and I can just chip away at this. Alright, and then I can go back in with my sponge and clean that up and make it a lot smoother and cleaner. And then the last factor in this, and you might have to do it a couple of times, you can also smooth this just with your hands if you don't have your tools yet. And that will actually smooth it quite nicely. It just takes a little bit more patience. And it's something I recommend even people that have their sponges and such already If you want a super smooth surface and it's feeling kind of gritty, go back in with your hands and you'll be able to sort of push that grit back down into the surface so it's not quite so sharp. So the next thing that we're gonna kind of talk about is exterior and interior. So if you want a rough texture, you can just sort of make that work. If you have things like this, that there's kind of a divot right there, I'm just going to take my trimming tool and I'm going to clean that up like that. And I can take my sponge or my hand over it. Smooths it right over. I do not expect these objects to be perfectly smooth, and I definitely encourage you to leave texture if that's the surface you want to work with. If you picked up one of these Surforms, or we've got a few kind of kicking around in the studio, that is another option for you to use. And I've got the blade in backwards, so I'm trying to quick switch that. Because you want to use this by pulling towards you, not pushing away from you. So one thing this can do is it can just sort of shave away at the surface, really quick and easy. If you've worked in plaster and sculpture, you'll likely have used one of these. And they're super useful. They're really good at cleaning up edges. But if you don't have one, the other techniques work as well. But always keep in mind, you always have to be conscious of the direction of the blade because that will only cut in one direction. So then I'm going to go back. I'm just going to clean this up. And I've cleaned up the edge quite a bit. You could also use either the metal rib to sort of scrape the surface. This does tend to scrape it, so it tends to leave that sort of line texture. If you, however, use this wood tool, wooden rib, it doesn't tend to scrape quite as much and tends to be a more even surface. So you can use this as well, and I'm just going to turn this. You can use this as well. Admittedly, if you have big divots like that, there's only so much this can do, so you kind of have to go back to your trimming tool to clean it up and smooth it out a little bit. And then go back in and clean this up. And I'm going to go into that corner. And at this point, whatever I take away, there is no way to put back. It just will not work. I recommend having to do as little sort of cleanup at the end as possible. And if you have a sort of rougher surface, go with that. I also recommend cleaning up bottom edges now because you can see how sort of sharp the edge look. So I would either just take my sponge along the edge or use my knife to just sort of clean that up. Because if it's sharp now, it's going to be even sharper once it has a layer of glass on it, which is what glaze is. So cleaning up that bottom edge now, whether with your knife or just running your sponge along it, both are good options for cleaning up the bottom. And those are just the basic methods of how to actually sort of finish out the surface of the piece. Again, a lot of this is if you want to smooth it. If you want a rough texture, you need to make sure you leave that texture there. And you need to try to have it as even as possible.